welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're going to be continuing So Many Beginnings, a Little Women remix by Bethany C. Morrow. And this is our last chapter that we're reading of this book because next month in April we'll be starting a brand new book. So today is chapter 4. If you missed chapters 1 through 3, those will be linked down below, along with some more information about this book. Chapter 4. Meg had only one slate chalkboard for use in her teaching tent, and she stood looking down at it now because it was broken. She didn't rage or weep because neither was her way. Instead, she breathed evenly, blinking slowly, as someone accustomed to misfortune might. She would have this moment of calm lament and then adjust, as one accustomed also to making do, and she'd carry on with her lessons tomorrow without chalkboards, despite that in an apparent show of camaraderie, the missionary teacher had gifted her two, both of which were now gone. The gifts had been considerate, emblems of good faith, meant to signify that the missionary teachers didn't wish to replace the devoted Negro teachers. When asked directly, they insisted that Negro teachers had their place, though they were women, and occasionally men who'd been specially trained for the work of instruction. She'd been specially trained as well, Meg thought, but didn't say, by a wealthy Southern child's governess. She couldn't know for certain, of course, but she doubted any of the missionary teachers had an upbringing like the girl she'd been made to shadow all her life, and, by forced attendance, the education Meg herself had received. They hadn't been friends, she and the wealthy Southern child. Yes, Meg had been treated like a plaything, but one could grow a devoted affection for a doll, so she did not doubt that the girl believed she loved her Meg. When she threw tantrums that resulted in Meg being forced to stay overnight with her, or when she insisted Meg be retrieved from the little shack where she would otherwise have slept happily amongst her family, the wealthy Southern child, who was permitted to act like one well into her debutante years, cooed to her that she loved Meg more than almost anyone. Meg sometimes felt she'd had the strangest old life of everyone. Her education extended far beyond letters, and as much Latin as the wealthy girl could be forced to memorize. For one thing, she'd learned that things did not have to break in that house for them to be replaced. The wealthy girl would often insist that something was worn clean out, and without investigation, her parents would send for another. In her teaching tent, Meg wrapped the shards of slate in a handkerchief. She didn't feel right disposing of it when it was such a valuable thing. Perhaps the missionary teachers weren't very unlike the wealthy girl after all, and they'd send away for it to be replaced. She sighed, untying her bonnet and closing her eyes in relief when she uncovered her hair and what little air didn't hang thick in her tent touched the dampness on her skin. She'd better not get her hopes up with these northern white people, she decided. They might be like their southern neighbors in more ways than she'd care to witness again. Because among the things Meg had learned as a living doll of a wealthy girl was what many genteel southern women tried to disguise. Like their ownership of people, their inheritance and profit of them. There must be things that northern white women hid, too. Meg's aunt held the slate pieces wrapped in a handkerchief, and she was standing in her teaching tent in the sweltering heat of a summer day in 1863. But it might as well have been a summer day years before. The wealthy girl held Meg's naked hand in hers, the fingerless lace gloves she wore prickly and damp with sweat. "He's going to marry me, Meg," she'd said, her whole face pink with excitement. "I knew he would. Aren't you envious?" "Yes, ma'am," Meg had answered, because by now she knew that the girl only understood congratulations that mingled with sadness. Good news was only good news if it didn't apply to everyone. "Will it be a long engagement? Will you live here?" The wealthy girl was pleased with Meg's questions, but only because she didn't know her captive as well as she presumed. In the cabins near the fields, a girl Meg's age had gotten married already. The wealthy girl's father didn't know, of course, but that didn't make it any less true. Meg had been surprised at the news, but Joe had told her that of course she wouldn't have known. She spent all of her time in the house with the wealthy girl, while young folk near the fields were stealing moments to spend together. She'd be lucky if they weren't all paired off by the time her wealthy girl was finally married and sent away, Joe thought, and soon Meg thought the same. She'd begun to worry, and so her enthusiasm about the wealthy girl's engagement had been genuine. It was months before the war would destabilize the area, and the March family would take an opportunity none knew to suspect yet, months before they would steal away to real freedom. But Meg felt certain that she was soon to be free of her most suffocating captor. The wealthy girl was going to be married, and Meg was finally going to be free to do the same. "But don't you worry, Meg," the girl had told her then, binding Meg's hands one on top of the other, and then nearly crushing them both in her own. "You're my dearest family, and I haven't forgotten you." The girl bit her lip and took a deep breath, as though she could not sense that Meg held hers. "What have you done?" Meg asked quietly, when she could wait no longer to have her fate sealed. "You spoil sport, you have to be surprised." The girl slapped Meg's face playfully, the way she often did. The sting didn't make Meg jump anymore, because it was meant to be a loving gesture, or so the wealthy girl said, through tears when Meg's pained reaction hurt her feelings. "I will be," Meg said sweetly, "but I can hardly stand the wait." "I knew you'd be excited, Meg. We mean so much more to each other than other people rightly know. I told Father you'd prefer to come with me, because we're family, and—" The wealthy Southern child bounced the way young Amy did so often by then. "You're mine!" Meg stood stunned now, as though the girl had struck her face again. "You're properly mine, on paper, as you should have been all along, Meg, and you shall come with me when I marry." She couldn't bring herself to move, let alone smile, though she knew there was a danger in not doing so. But Meg could not perform, not just then. Not in the moment when she was being delivered the most terrible news, as though it was a dream come true. "And I've done something wonderful for you, Meg, even though Father doesn't think I should. And I won't tell you what until you ask." When she tried to speak, Meg's voice croaked as though she'd been parched. She had to clear her throat before she could try again. "Please tell me what you've done for me," said Meg, and Meg said the girl's name then, though she had not done so since, and intended never to again. "I know that you have sisters," she said, and Meg culled her own breath sharply. "And don't get your hopes up. I've no use for gossiping ninnies who will mind each other better than my home. But I've asked Father to let us take the mute one. Aren't I generous, Meg? Aren't you pleased?" "You are. Generous." Meg pulled the corners of her lips up, though it felt like her skin might tear. "I'm so grateful and pleased." The girl had thrown her arms around Meg's neck then, and it had taken a heroic measure of strength to hug the girl back. In her teaching tent, Meg still held the broken chalkboard in her hands. She hadn't thought of that day in quite some time, and she hadn't meant to just now either. Sometimes the old life intruded into her new one, in a way she was beginning to suspect it always might, while she had to be so close to white people. While she still had to ask them for things, or depend on what they considered their generosity. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised to find a young teacher so deep in her thoughts." Joseph Williams's voice snatched Meg back into the present. And when she turned to see him standing just inside the tent flaps, her chest rose despite where she'd been. "You must know a great many things worth devoting a quiet moment to." "It's lovely to see you again," Meg said, and she was almost pleased with the way her painful memory made her steady and calm. After all, this was perhaps the first time in the day since he'd joined the March women for supper that she hadn't been thinking of Joseph. He took a step deeper into the tent, his chin dipping as though asking for permission. "Please," she said, extending her hand momentarily, "come inside, if you can stand to be inside in this offensive heat." "It is taking some getting used to," he confessed, and took a handkerchief from his pocket to dab the back of his neck. "I can't say I wasn't warned, but I don't think one can fully prepare for North Carolina's summer." Is the weather in Pennsylvania very pleasant? Meg asked, sitting on a crude bench where the most punctual of her students perched during lessons. Joseph joined her, though he minded a respectable distance. By comparison, I must say, although I doubt very much that your winters are quite as bitter. The two fell into silence after that. Meg hoped he'd tell her more of Pennsylvania and how else it differed from North Carolina, and of the people he'd left there. There must be people. He wasn't married, of course, but even northern folk were said to love their families, and having been born free, she thought it mustn't be a blessed miracle for him to know both his mother and his father. Of course, she wouldn't ask. Her wealthy southern girl had received all manner of instruction on courting language, and how best a lady should inspire conversation, which often was simply with an inviting openness that did not demand divulging. Perhaps it was not unlike her role as polite plaything, though not nearly as stifling, and certainly not painful. She had learned to be available, though not insistent, and perhaps that patience would serve her well in getting to know Joseph Williams. "I've enjoyed meeting you, Miss Meg," he said, turning his chin to look at her. He turned at the waist as well, as though he were opening up to her. "I'm so glad," she replied, turning at the waist as well. She wanted to say more. That she'd worried, even after stealing free, that courtship and marriage had already passed her by. That she'd worried the chance had been stolen from her, even though she had never moved away with her wealthy girl and the fiancé. She didn't even know whether the two ever got married. Perhaps the fiancé took up the Confederate uniform and went to fight instead. Maybe he'd fallen in battle already. And married or not, the wealthy girl's beautiful, certain life was already done. She didn't dare hope those things, she only wondered. She needn't, though, she realized, now that Joseph Williams was sitting next to her, saying that he'd enjoyed meeting her. Nothing had been taken, she was finding. She'd only needed to wait. "I've come to ask if I might write to you," Joseph said, "when I leave." Meg was still smiling because he'd spoken too quickly, and it took another moment before she realized what he'd said. "When you leave?" she asked. "I'll be continuing my recruitment with General Wild," he said, and clearly he was still pleased at the prospect. "You've only just arrived," Meg said, trying to hide the extent of her bewilderment. "Would you move on so soon?" "War waits for no man, I'm afraid." As though he'd intended the words to land more lightly against her than they did, Joseph carried on. "But I'll remember Roanoke so fondly, Miss Meg, and Yo-Pon-Tee." She was meant to smile then, so she did. "And I'd like to write to you, if you'll allow it," he said. "I'm being impossible," Meg chided herself. He wanted to write to her while he was away. She could at least take heart in that. It wasn't as though she could honestly have expected him to ask anything else just yet. And he was recruiting men for battle. He wasn't yet fighting in one himself. She wouldn't be a war widow if Joseph Williams was the man she was meant to marry. He would be away, like Papa was, she thought, to comfort herself. Distant, but not in danger. No more than they'd all always been. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Williams," she said, and this time her smile was sincere. "Please, Miss Meg," he said, one of his hands falling over hers. "You must call me Joseph." All right, if you'd like to find out what else happens in this book and read it for yourself, it will now be available for checkout at the library. I hope you enjoyed getting a little peek at this story as much as I did, and we'll see you again next Friday with a brand new book. All right, have a great weekend. Bye!